Paula, who is another talented cellist from Rio Grande do Sul, the very south of Brazil. Um, those play in Rio Grande do Sul. Actually, there are quite a lot of Germans and Italians who, from of course 2 centuries ago. And but she has an interesting question. She's asking about how to build facility in scale playing. How do you transition from slow playing to fast playing, and how do you build up a healthy technique for fast playing in your scale practicing?
Well, those are very intelligent questions. I would say, you know, one of the probably important things. I mean, when you play slower with more time per note, there's more opportunity to put more weight in the string, which is usually what you practice to improve your sound. You know, to have more contact, to have a fuller, richer sound. But as we go faster, there's not as much time to play a note. So while some of that kind of practice can help and does help your sound at higher speeds, if we only are coming from that kind of approach, we may not be able to play very fast at some point because we might be too heavy or have too much weight. So I think it's important, again, when you're practicing your scales, to practice them creatively and differently. So I wouldn't use the same weight all the time. I wouldn't use the same bow speed. I mean, if you're practicing for bow distribution, then okay, then you know, maybe to divide the bow into 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, 12, 16, and 32 notes to a bow. But then once you have that kind of distribution, then you can start practicing for sort of uneven things, or maybe like you can practice triple forte to triple piano, or vice versa. Then you'll use more bow in the first couple beats than at the end, or less depending on what you're doing. So to kind of be able to work on the so-called diagonals in music, which is the articulations, colors, and dynamics, those types of things. And also, while it is important to practice your scales kind of cold turkey, which means getting rid of all the emotions and the feelings and all that, and just being sure that you know what you're doing and physically, but also then it's important, I think, to practice then with a musical idea. You know, like for example, what is one of the great Tchaikovsky melodies from the Nutcracker? It's this. It's a G major scale. So that's all it is, a descending G major scale. So it's just proof that you can do expressive things with scales, you know, in general. And then to play faster, you need to be lighter, and basically the gestures in a way become smaller. So if I'm at a slow speed doing like at that tempo, I'm using this much bow per note, but if I went like or something faster, then you can see that the amount of bow per note is a lot smaller. And if you need to do something, so basically, as you go faster and as you play faster, the amount of bow in a way will become less on its own, just out of, you know, physics will do that. So that's why it's important to kind of have enough wingspan at the beginning, or horizontal motion, because as you get faster, it's going to be smaller. And so, but there, it is true, you have to accommodate for the speed, become lighter. I mean, you still have weight, and then certainly to prepare something lighter in the left side as well. But you can prepare in a slow tempo with tension and release and good balance here, and not being too heavy, because if you get really heavy at a slow speed, right, it's hard to play fast.
Great, Mark. Can you just expand a little bit on tension and release?
Yes. Tension is when you feel something, and release is when you don't. No. But in a way, I mean, and in a way, the physicality of tension and release is directly, there's a relation between that and the emotional heights and lows in music. But the idea, the very basic idea of tension and release is that every muscle action that you use needs to be released. On the left side, we'll say, the finger needs to be released before the next finger can be used. And ideally, also the tension in the arm will, by doing so, releases. You know, if I release the finger, I can feel through the arm the tension relaxing or releasing before the next. And you can, the good news is you can actually hear that in the left side. If I don't release the tension, so it sort of reminds me of like a cat in the claws. You know, it starts getting this tense kind of sound, versus if I'm releasing, each note is articulates better, and at the same time there's space or breath between each note that you can, of course, adjust any way you want with the arm motions on both sides. And tension release on the bow means that it's all weight distribution from the back on both sides. So when I'm on the right side, when I'm setting the weight down, in order to set the weight down, I can't have much tension in the bow before I get there. So this has to be, you know, pretty relaxed. Everything, you know, just touch the bow enough so you don't drop it. And then when I bring the weight down and I can feel the shoulder, then at that moment, the fingers, the tension comes into play because it absorbs the weight from the back. And then when I'm pulling the bow across the string, if I'm using weight and not squeezing, so to speak, as I cross the middle of the bow and get to the upper half, at this point, the responsibilities change. So I'll have more tension in the forearm as I get near the tips to keep the weight there. And then at the frog, I will have more feeling of weight from the shoulder and back here. And so the idea there is that by doing so, if you aren't squeezing, that in a sense, all the different parts of the arm will breathe at some point, because more tension in the forearm and fingers here, and then breathes at the frog less, and then the upper arm, shoulder, and back take over at the frog. So there's a sort of cyclical tension and release going on in the bow arm as well. But the difference between that and squeezing is when the weight distribution is somehow compromised, and that usually happens when there are hinges in the arm. So if I play like this, then probably most of the weight is in the elbow, and not all of it's going into the hand. Or if I'm over pronated, where you're not getting the full weight of the arm. And so there's different things we can do that might prevent, or sometimes it looks good, but you know, you're just stiff and tight in the shoulder or the back, and by not releasing that, then you're forced, the small muscles are forced in the hand to work harder. And then if I do that, the only way to get louder really is to squeeze if I'm tight in this shoulder area back here. So these are sort of the objective as cellists, is we just want to get the biggest bang for the buck, so to speak. So meaning that to get the most return on our investment, like good investors in Wall Street.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful, Mark. Dora, who is a cellist that you met here in Natal many years ago, she's easy to recognize here in Natal because she was the only one that looked German. So you probably remember her. She's now studying in she's doing her doctoral in Portugal, but she has a wonderful cello class in Fortaleza with many beautiful, beautiful cellists. And she's asking if you could talk a little bit about the way you hold your thumb in the bow arm, and if there is any role of the thumb when you change bows.
Sure, absolutely. The thumb is the finger on both sides that gets forgotten about because we don't see it. And so it's very easy to neglect it, but it's incredibly important, as we know, because it's the only finger on the other side of the neck or of the bow on the frog area. And so, well, I mean, for somebody with a, you could say, average size hand, probably the easiest way to find the bow hold would be just to set your hand down on your knee, pick it up, and just put it over the bow, and you're done. But then in terms of if you do that, the thumb naturally should be slightly bent, because if you, nobody comes out of their mother's womb with their hand like that, because you can feel that's tension, that's an extension, and nobody comes out like this either, meaning that's also tension. So you want to find the most quote unquote relaxed position of the hand, and then the thumb, it's going, and you'll have to bend these knuckles differently according to how your hand is. If you have really long fingers, you'll probably be forced to bring these down more, the knuckles, so that the thumb can reach. And also, if you have short fingers, then maybe you might be more upright than otherwise. And so there are going to be exceptions or adjustments to be made. This isn't good either if I'm too bent, because that's tension. I feel it right in here. And so basically, you just have to experiment and be aware. If you can, so to know when you're extending or stretching your finger or thumb, and when you're not, when it's in tension, when it's not. And the same on the left side. Most people agree that hand should be more or less in an egg shape, this kind of as though you could stick an egg in there, and probably somewhere between the first and second finger, but again, where it would naturally fall and not be in tension. Also, probably your position of the hand would change that. This is more perpendicular, this is a little more slanted. So it really, those are the variables, but yes, so that's what I would say would probably be a good place to start in terms of thumb positions.
Good. And do you consider any thumb movements with the change in the bow change, or?
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, when I mean, the arm leads, the bow changes, but you're right, there has to be flexibility here, or else you can't get a good sound.
Yeah.
I mean, and also to have, but if you're not squeezing, then, well, when generally on an up bow, and I probably, I mean, a lot of great string players do it, especially violinists, but I actually learned it from a violinist. I learned it from Isaac Stern. And he talked about that you're going to be more flat-haired on an up bow, and then a little bit more towards you on a down bow, which actually kind of makes sense with the bow motion, because on an up bow you lead the arms a little higher, and so in order to get the weight and to get a good sound, if you use a little more hair, that can sort of compensate for that, versus the down bow, where sort of the natural weight of the shoulder is easier to find. So that's, and in terms of the thumb, that means it's going to be a little more probably up on an up bow, and then a little more bent on the down bow, with that sort of, you can call it compression, shocks, like on your car. If you can kind of see that motion there. subtle, and in a way that if I do it faster, right? It functions like collé, which is which is in a way required, I think, to some extent, to have good sounding bow changes.
Very nice, Mark. I think we have time for one last question.
Sure.
I'm just tem outras perguntas. Eu vou pedir desculpa a todo mundo que não consegui responder. There are many other questions, but we can't get them all. But Lucas, who is from Helsinki, actually he's from Espírito Santo, close to Rio. Wonderful talent. He's doing his master's at Sibelius Academy. And of course, he feels like he's in Disneyland because the cello playing is at such high level in Helsinki.
Sure.
He's asking if you could talk a little bit about how to develop a healthy sautille or spiccato without too much tension in the bow arm.
Right. Well, spiccato is, I mean, there's several ways to do it successfully. The one that I'm using is a from the string. Well, of course, I play in the Cleveland Orchestra. We're always from the string, but you know, whether from the string or above the string, the real truth is there has to be both, because you can't play from the string from a standstill, and at the same time you can't be, you know, flying in from, I don't know, from somewhere else and just like randomly. So in other words, you have to prepare, but then play some of the string. But once you're, it actually, the spiccato I use comes from the same sort of bow motion I used to play legato, actually, which is just. So it's the circles. I mean, it's the Starker Parizeau idea of you know, keeping the hand, like everybody agrees, along the string, because that's where the sound is, but to also adhere to the circular motions of the joints of the body. And how it works is, without squeezing, as you speed up, at some point you let go of the fingers. And interestingly enough, I have an upward staccato going right now. It'd be better if I that sounds better. But you can do if you really want to. But where people usually have difficulty is, especially when you're first learning it, is people get excited when it becomes time for the bow to jump. And when they get excited / nervous, and then by doing that, then tension builds up here, and then at some point this upper part of the arm becomes tight, and it becomes more like this again, where the sort of the motion in this part of the arm stops. And so that's something that needs some practice, and probably the thing to look out for when you're doing that is to make sure, again, you're releasing the shoulder muscle back here, because when you do, it actually feels good to pull a bow across the string, because that weight is being released into the bow. But the minute that you hold it, things sort of cease to work. And like what I'm doing is a hand spiccato just now. If I hold this up too much, I get a hand spiccato, which you can do, but what you can hear is that it's always a little uneven, so that you always have a chuck, a chuck, a chuck, a chuck, a chuck, a chuck. So all the trouble is for comfort, and also just to have to try to aspire for an even spiccato. So that's how I go about it, and also with the pulse. But it's kind of key that when you're practicing this, that you don't have too much weight in the fingers, so that in the bow stroke the forearm still opens and closes. Because if you're doing this one, again, this type of spiccato won't work. So it needs a little monkeying with. It's a bow trick, and that's why they call them bow tricks. So you got to figure out how to get the bow to work for you.
exactly. And that's why you can't really teach those bow strokes step by step and it will work. It's people have to feel in their own bodies and use their own creativities. And that's why you see
And that,
some funny theories at times.
yes, well, I mean, we can explain how it works and what to do, but it requires the student to really take what you give them and really think about it and to do their own experimentation, because bow tricks are about physical sensations, finding the physical feel that leads to the desired result. And you know, nobody could probably in such detail explain those kinds of things like Starker, but he had a sense of humor once too, because I went to him to ask the pedagogical explanation for ricochet. I said, "How do you do ricochet?" And he said, "Drop the bow." And then of course he went, but that's just typical Starker. So dry can be a sense of humor as well.
That's wonderful. Mark, I want to thank you so much for, you know, another thing that I admire about you so much is that you are a wonderful cellist, as good as it gets. But you're always very generous on explaining. And I've seen you teaching many times. So even the most basic aspects of cello playing, you have you are able to make them simple and explainable, and that's not very common in many wonderful players like you that have the patience. And but I think you also take the Starker tradition on your hands, whereas he was able to explain everything, and he did throughout his life, and that's why he built an army of wonderful cellists.
Yeah.
Um,
And one thing that a lot of people don't know about him is he actually could do all the things he chose not to do too. So meaning
right.
he knew how to play the cello in many other ways. He just chose not to.
That's very interesting.
And and the lesson there is try to learn how to do as many different things with the instrument as you can, just so you have. The idea is just to have choices, so that you can ultimately decide what you want to do, how you want to play, instead of being, you know, kind of limited by what you do, you know, but what you're just, you know, and then that also leads to the importance of practicing in different ways, just to add dimension to your playing. And of course, ultimately, when you're working on something, different ways that are compatible is probably better, so you don't end up like this. But
no, but that's really interesting, because what you're saying is he could play in many different ways. So that's so much more intelligent than just dismissing a way of playing and saying, I'm not going to try this.
right.
But if you can actually do it, you can choose. Because if you can't, there's no choice there.
Right. And I can actually tell the people listening today that some of the best things I've discovered before, at my first reaction was like, no way. I was just like, that's not going to work. You know? And then you tried it. And I think the reason for that is often it has to do with how you think about something. Because if you change the way you think about something, sometimes an idea that seems ludicrous suddenly is like a revolution or a revelation. And sometimes and a lot of times those are the ideas that really change you. So the sort of moral of the story is, don't judge anything until you can do it well. And then once you really can do it well, then it's kind of like learning Hindemith. Don't judge it until you've learned it, because usually
right.
When you're first learning something that's like that, it's like, what is this? You know, understand it, and then you can decide if you like it or not. But
well, Mark, yeah, this is real wisdom. I think this is wonderful thought that you shared with us. and in the name of all Brazilian cellists that have been watching to this tonight, you've been a great help to the development of cello playing here in Brazil, and always very open-hearted. And thank you so much for tonight. We have another 30 seconds on Instagram, but it's very generous of you, Mark. Muito obrigado.
Well, thank you, Fabio, and thank you to everybody. Brazil is an amazing country with such a diverse group of talented people.